Good morning, good afternoon, something like that. All right, awesome. So I look forward to this panel. I think it's going to be a kind of wild and crazy ride. And we're going to start with a talk from Remy to get us warmed and loosened up even more. So I don't want to spend too much time introducing the panel. You'll see them behind me. I think many people you know already. And we'll try to move along real quickly. Slack's a great back channel. I want you guys to keep chattering in it, but be aware I may well pick out things I like that I see go by, and you may be called on to expound on that. And I want to make sure that you guys are giving us comments from the audience, not just questions. I want to hear your opinions along with the panelists today. And if we don't have time to cover everything in Slack or even in the question list, I want to emphasize that there is a breakout at 5 p.m. You can start sticking stuff in that Slack channel, the breakout for the progressive enhancement. And remember to stick those mics right in your face when you're talking. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Remy if you're ready.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, so welcome to the Progressive Enhancement panel. So, just a bit of history. 2003, Steve, champion on WebMonkey, coins the term progressive enhancement. And he then goes ahead and documents the approach that the web community is using for graceful degradation, and suggests that the approach should aim to be structured towards the lowest common denominator. There is no specific definition actually in this original blog post. So this kind of explains why there's some movement around the idea of what is progressive enhancement. So I ran a fairly focused survey of my followers. I asked my Twitter followers to answer a few questions. One of them was, what is progressive enhancement? And I pushed them down four potential answers. And I asked them to share that survey. So most of my followers will probably have the same kind of sensibilities as me. It's a very narrow focus group. I'm interested in standards and doing a good job. It's quite probable that these people are interested in the same kind of thing. But out of 800 people, 25% of the answers were progressive enhancement is making the site or the app work without JavaScript. So also, who turns off JavaScript? They may not turn off JavaScript. It may be that it doesn't come down the wire, it may be broken. Stuart Langridge has a flowchart, which I've posted the link in the Slack channel, which you can have a look at. It's worth looking at. All these different potential points of failure where JavaScript won't be delivered. So, yeah. You all know the story. No JavaScript, blank page. Maybe it's worse. I don't know what's worse, whether it's a blank page or something that says, please enable JavaScript. This is Talkie.io, absolutely superb product. Back them on Kickstarter and stuff. But it uses WebRTC for its video conferencing. And WebRTC is entirely JavaScript, so there is no product there without JavaScript. So how on earth would this work? Okay, well, we'll give them a pass. Instagram, a photo website where you put images on a website. I'm not sure quite what would be required to make this work without JavaScript. Maybe one of these. But yeah, it's a big company. It's owned by React. It's owned by Facebook. This page is actually just 2 script tags with React in it, with one div. So, what about the smaller developers? Someone who cares about standards. What about the mighty Mr. Appcache Jake Archibald? What about his websites? So the superb tool SVG OMG with JavaScript disabled. I just recorded a little session of me using his tool. I'm pretty excited to use it. And I'm not clicking. Nothing's happening. So I'm looking for some links. I spot a link at the bottom. That's definitely a link, right? Yep. No. No. Very, very frustrated. Very frustrated customer. No, sorry. There's no response there. But Jake did an interview, or he answered some questions around how he built this tool. And I really like this quote that I pulled out. And he said that I'm a strong believer in progressive enhancement, but also that each phase of the enhancement needs a user. Working without JavaScript certainly benefits older browsers, but the site is targeted at developers, and I figured I'd safely leave the older browsers behind. And this is key. The SVG OMG does progressively enhance other features, other bits of tech. I haven't checked, but I'm guessing service workers is in there because everything Jake does has a service worker attached. And actually, Jeremy, my fellow panelist, also sums it up quite well in a response to a blog post about how do we make these things work without JavaScript. And I pulled out a small quote from him that he was saying that progressive enhancement is figuring out what the core functionality is and what the enhancement is. So how do we reframe our thinking towards what progressive enhancement is, rather than just saying this has to work without JavaScript? And then we have the thick clients, where JavaScript is entirely in the client side. So Angular, React, Ember, to some degree, they don't have a developer story on how to progressively enhance. There's no shining examples of how this works. And I think that's why there is actually it's not that it's not possible. It's not that you couldn't make Flash accessible. Flash was accessible, just generally people didn't do it. I haven't seen a developer story that shows how an Ember app, Angular app is accessible. And I was thinking about web components, kind of the last week, pretty hot topic of debate. We can cause all kinds of mess on the internet, but on the other hand, they are perfect for progressive enhancement. So take this simple HTML. I'm trying to validate a credit card. I'm not putting a pattern attribute in there because it would be too complicated. There's no validation. It doesn't tell me that if it begins with a 4, it's a Visa card or anything like that. But I could progressively enhance in the same way that I could add like a input type equals date, and the browser would enhance the input to a date element by just wrapping it in a web component. This is what I imagine web components to do for me. And if there's no web component support, the input still works. So are web components a future for progressive enhancement? And this is the big potential problem I think is on the horizon for us, and which is why we talk about JavaScript in the session, actually, is that developers are inherently lazy. We're very good at finding the most optimized path to the solution, and we stick to that. And the more complicated parts or the difficult parts tend to fall away, sadly, at the cost of accessibility, progressive enhancement, and so on. And I think there's a much bigger problem on the horizon, which is ES6, ES Next, ES 2015, and 16, and so on. So, taking a step back for a moment, say we're writing just a pure HTML website. You remember these? No JavaScript, no CSS, and we're going to use the latest and greatest email validation. We just do input type equals email, and we automatically get all that validation. If there's no input type equals email support, then the browser does not break. The user can still do the thing they were planning on doing. However, JavaScript's not the same. We can code defensively, we can add polyfills, but ES6 has features that cannot live alongside of ES5. This will cause a syntax error if you, in your one, okay, we're not going to be bundling code, but honestly, we probably will be for the next 3 or 4 years. If we bundle a JavaScript file and this fat arrow is delivered to an ES5 browser, it'll just break. All of the JavaScript will break. And I asked some of the TC39 people and JavaScript experts what the solution is to this, and it's just a mixed response, which is, we use feature detection, so we can feature detect using evals and try catches for fat arrows, and we deliver different JavaScript. Or maybe we deliver ES6 and we defer down to ES5. But we're asking developers to compile 2 different source codes and always deploy these. And I feel like in years to come, in 5, 10 years, when we're building new websites, if you're just deploying ES6 and not thinking about ES5, the old browsers will not work at all because JavaScript just blows up into a mess, but also some future browser that you've not thought about. Maybe there's a new mobile device that's super low powered that doesn't have ES6 support. It's just not going to render that JavaScript. So is there a workflow that can solve this? And hopefully we can talk about some of those questions.
That's you. I was
me. I'm going to sit there.
All right, let's see. Where's everyone? Jeremy down there. Lee, you are next to Remy here. James on there. You are next to me on there.
Oh no. I've hooked my thing.
All right. So I had the pleasure of vetting through all the great questions that were submitted on Google Moderator for this session. And though there wasn't exactly a question quite like this. I was inspired by one submitted by Jason Brown, kind of mumbled in with my own thoughts. Because if you eliminated all the questions in that queue that didn't have the letters ES in it, you were left with like 2. So with that in mind, why do you think that people are so honed in on JavaScript alone when they talk about progressive enhancement? What about HTML and CSS? Has progressive enhancement really come to be a JavaScript-only concern? And I'm going to let Jeremy start with this.
Well, I think the reason why people be honed in on JavaScript is that everyone's pretty honed in on JavaScript in general. You know, presenting with a problem and how do I solve this with JavaScript? That seems to be the modern developer mindset. But probably when it comes to progressive enhancement, the main reason is what Remy was talking about, is that the error handling model of JavaScript is different to the error handling model of HTML and CSS. So we do use progressive enhancement all the time with HTML and CSS. We just don't even think about it. I mean, actually, every line of CSS you write is progressive enhancement because every line of CSS you write is a suggestion to the browser of how it should style something. But why we stop thinking about it is that when a browser doesn't understand some CSS, it doesn't throw an error, it doesn't complain. And because that's not the case with JavaScript, then immediately we start honing in on JavaScript and saying, how can we have our cake and eat it too with JavaScript in the same way that we do that with...
Are we looking at a situation where JavaScript is not as well cut out for progressive enhancement as HTML or CSS? Yes!
No, it's not. It's like we have to build defensively the whole time. And like I think it's actually that it's been drummed into people that making it work is making the whole thing work without JavaScript. I think that's actually the root of the problem, and that we need to completely change that approach and work to a baseline.
Do you think that that's how developers perceive the notion of progressive enhancement with JavaScript on that binary layer level like that?
Yeah, I think so. It seems to be, as Remy said, an all-or-nothing approach. And obviously, we've done a really good job of making it so it doesn't have to be that. We can feature detect pretty well. We've got a lot of approaches to be able to kind of layer JavaScript rather than like it's not all JavaScript or nothing. We can kind of add bits and bits at a time. I think as developers, I guess maybe we're all very inherently lazy, but we just need to get better at doing that, I think.
So Kyle, I see you in the queue there. You know a little bit of something about JavaScript. You want to have a say?
Could I just say, I don't know if it's so much about developers being lazy, but developers do like things to be binary, like things to be yes or no, on or off.
A clear directive.
A clear, like, yes. And so
so people have circled around this, turned JavaScript off, and it works, therefore...
Yeah, and lazy, I mean lazy as in optimized, as in do not exert any extra energy required.
Yeah.
So I think one of the... I'm not on the panel, but I'm going to answer this question for the panel. I think one of the reasons why the focus is wrong, and we're premising that the focus is wrong if it's only JavaScript, is that our focus is too much on defining the bottom layer of progressive enhancement as device capability and not on user preference. When we say that we think that all users expect that we should fill up 100% of their device capability 100% of the time, we get way too focused on the tech and not focused enough on the user. So if I can do WebGL on my phone, but I only have 3% battery life and I just need the bus schedule and I'm in Warsaw, Poland, I just want a bus schedule. But I don't have a way to say that to you, the browser, and the developer that built the site assumes I want everything. I think that's part of the reason why we're missing the point, is because we've lost focus on the user.
Gotcha.
I want to add...
All right, let's get mics to Jason and Jonathan. Jason, especially as the submitter of this question, I'd love to hear. Lee, you had...
Oh, yeah, sorry. I wanted to add, so we talked about whether or not we want to focus on HTML and CSS versus JavaScript as something we want to progressively enhance. I think that depends a lot on what your lowest common denominator is. So these days we spend a lot of time thinking about X browser versus Y browser, but what about devices? Mobile devices in particular. So I want to tell you a quick story. At Facebook, we wanted to figure out why people weren't using Facebook in Japan. So we sent 2 engineers to Japan to talk to people and figure out what they could build. And they realized that Facebook just didn't load on the phone. They got a white screen. And the reason why is because the devices didn't support all of CSS nor all of HTML. Div tags had margin on the bottom that you couldn't get rid of. So we ended up building a completely custom site for Japan just to match the devices that people use there. Since then, we've integrated that into the way that progressive enhancement works on Facebook's mobile site, but that was all about HTML and CSS. We didn't even think about the JavaScript aspects of progressive enhancement in that case.
And we are going to come back to talking about baselines in a little bit. I want to get one comment, please, and then we'll move on.
Hello?
Yep.
There we go. So I think saying it's very easy for us to focus on JavaScript because it breaks is very lazy. And I know we said, we go for that high-performance path and we don't kind of consider everything else. But like Lisa just said, Facebook to not load in Japan is probably a very critical thing for you guys. So it's still important, it still should be part of the conversation that CSS has to still work in terms of displaying a bus timetable. It doesn't matter that it's going to have nice transitions or the margins right. It should just still display the basic information, and then you progressively add the nicest styles, the JS that makes it work, better in certain browsers, devices, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that people do get fixated on if I switch JavaScript off, does it still work? But that's more like a proxy for testing, was this site built without assumptions? Mm-hmm. And then people mistake the test for the attitude, I guess, and think, progressive enhancement is about switching JavaScript off. And that's kind of like saying, well, I don't need to make my car survive a crash because I have no intention of putting crash dummies in it and hitting it against a wall. It's not about, that you expect people to crash a car or turn off JavaScript, but it's more accepting the fact that shit happens. And rather than having the assumption that everything's going to be available, that everyone's got a great support level, getting comfortable with the idea that actually it's a big unknown world out there in various markets, various devices, various people, and getting comfortable with not having those assumptions.
All right, I want to move on to the next question. Keep us on our toes. It's already been bandied around a couple times. We're talking a lot about feature detection, which is a vital strategy for progressive enhancement, at least when we're talking about these things. Do we need, and some of these may be sort of ridiculous, some of them may be thought-provoking, but do we need a feature detection API within JavaScript? Client hinting on the server going to help us out? Or is our current trend of kind of evaluating and doing a cutting the mustard type of test and conditional loading sufficient? And this comes from Patrick Hammond, paraphrased at least.
So I think that would be great if we had it when the web was invented decades ago, but the reality is that we don't have that. So say we decided it would be awesome that we have that today.
I'm sorry, when you say that, you're talking about...
JavaScript feature detection, APIs, and various forms proposed. Pick one, pick your favorite, that we have that today. Magically, we have it. What is the time delta between now when we get to introduce it and when shitty mobile devices in the edge of places that we want to support have that on their phones to figure out whether or not we have these things? So I think we will always have a reality of having to this feature detection, especially since we're considering the lowest common denominator devices. We're going to add a brand new feature to JavaScript to enable this thing. I think...
Yeah, I'd like to have you guys...
I'm confused because we do have feature detection in JavaScript for most things, the ES&X being the exception, but these days, if I plan to use geolocation, I plan to use query selector, I plan to use anything,
you can always see if it's undefined.
No, but if those came as hints to the server to say, this device has geolocation support, and the server can say, cool, here is the geolocation version of the code. Or this device has the latest, greatest, I think it works better with it has the latest version of JavaScript, the very, very latest version of JavaScript, even though it's a moving target. Then you can say, okay, well, you're going to get my full ES6 super beautiful version, or you get the slower one, which is ES5.
All right, we got a great group of people starting to format here, so let's get a mic to Stuart and Max to get some stuff, and while we're getting that out, I want to also think a little bit about, so we're talking, there's this notion about cutting the mustard, the core set of feature tests to say that for your project says this is a baseline browser for me. Do we see that evolving in a consistent way, or is it going to be piecemeal, for everyone?
Feels like it'd be very contextual based on your site and your users. And I can't remember who I was talking to last night, but someone was talking about how they came up with this cutting the mustard test to work for them, and every couple of months they kind of evolved it over time. It feels like there's no way the BBC's cutting the mustard can't be the standard forever, right? And it's going to change based on who you are and who your users are and what kind of devices they're using.
Yeah, I think the cutting the mustard needs to be specific to the project, and more than that, it needs to be specific to what you're using in your project. So if I need to use query selector and add event listener, that's what I'll test for. If I need to use local storage, that's what I'll test for. I don't like the way the cutting the mustard has kind of evolved into this catch-all thing that's basically browser detection by any other name.
You won't check for every feature that you're about to use. It just won't
pretty
happen.
Hardcore, Remy.
I want to hear from the audience. So who's got the hot potato? All right.
Hiya. There are already APIs in the browser. There's I can't remember what the old knackered one was. Document. has feature, which was a mess, and now always returns true, which is insane. Surely going the other way would have been a better idea. But and now also we have CSS.supports, thanks to this chap down here, which ironically is also now being used for non-CSS features. So that's another slightly balked API already. Thanks. So they are there, but there's always going to be this problem about browsers lying, as we kind of tend to say, which is obviously a problem with, when we're trying to do kind of what I call the hacky feature detection, like the stuff Modernizer does and so on, where you're looking for clues. There's always that opportunity to lie, and some browsers have been known to, we believe they intentionally lied to give themselves better scores and stuff like this. Is that ever a solvable problem? Can you always, if you have a particular API, can you believe the browser, or are you better off just detecting it yourself?
Hang on, Jeremy. I want to get a couple more people from the floor. Patrick, you round? We'll talk to you, and then we'll see.
So I've done, along with Stuart, and I've done a fair amount of work on Modernizer. I just wanted to make more of a comment than anything that feature detection, as far as the client side, has gotten substantially better with APIs. It's got more and more with features that are added to ES6 or even ES5. It's a matter of just checking if that document or if that function is undefined or something along those lines. Whereas if you go back further and further in our CSS features.
And I do want to encourage people from the audience to make comments. We want that. Don't feel like that's inappropriate. That's awesome. Thank you. So
so I just want to say what you outlined is you're right. That's the worst case scenario, is a browser claiming to support something when it doesn't. And you're right in that the browsers have gotten better about that. And also shout out to Paul Irish, because I believe he was maintaining a wiki page with these are the things we can't detect yet. Is that? Yeah, okay. So just want to say yes, you've nailed it. The worst case scenario is a browser claiming to support something or just not being detectable.
All right, so I'm going to keep us moving on. I know a lot of people have a lot to say on these topics, so I appreciate your patience. I want to talk a little bit about this thing we've been talking about, syntax breaking changes. Are we about to break everything with syntax changes in JS 2015 and beyond? Are we facing a forever future of transpilers like Babel to protect ourselves?
So, you want to go?
Yeah, so, is this on?
It will turn on.
Okay. So yes, there is this problem where we're introducing new syntax into JavaScript that is not going to be able to be parsed in older browsers. And it's, a lot of people, when they think about this stuff, they think about, like, here's the whole spec, and eventually we'll have a browser that supports this spec, but that's not the reality we face. So when we talk about this, we need to frame it as these things over time. So this is one feature that we have support for, this is another feature. And then there's another level to that, which is this feature has been implemented correctly. So there's support for some ES 2015 things in Firefox and Chrome. Firefox in particular, I know, maybe not currently, but at one point did have some incorrect implementations there. Are we facing a future of Babel always transpiling for you? And I think that is actually a mistake for the web. I think assuming that everyone, in order to move everyone to this new thing, we're going to rely on transpilers is not the right way to approach it. Simply because most of the web does not use tools like this. The majority of people, Babel is way above their head. Not because they're not informed, just because this is not the web that was promised in requiring compilers.
This is not my beautiful web.
So yeah. I want to add a couple of pieces to that. One is, I think we've already done this before, but on a smaller scale, in moving from ES3 to ES5. At least I personally experienced a lot of pain in that initial transition, and still to some degree with the support of IE8 that we still have. You can get parse errors that work perfectly fine in modern browsers but won't work there. And again, going back to mobile browsers that have crappier old versions with really, really old versions of JavaScript, we've already had to tackle this, and transpilers is exactly how we solved that problem 5 years ago. So are we in a world where we have to support transpilers? Well, I've been in that world for 5 years now, and I certainly welcome tools like Babel and other things like that to help us push forward. I think we have a continuum where on one end we have like 1996 JavaScript, on the other end we have ES 2016 plus, right, which are like drafts of specifications that haven't been added yet, and we get to pick our poison. We get to pick a point in the middle. And certain browsers have their point along that continuum, but like you were talking about, not every browser is like, I do all of ES5 and nothing more, nothing less, or I do all of ES6 and nothing more, nothing less. They have points on these continuums. They have all of the spec plus some things, or all of the spec except for a detail. And we have to patch. We have to fill the holes. And if we want to use these features because we're excited about them, transpiling is a way that we do that. And we're going to have this cadence of a new version of the spec every year and new features continuously. If we want to use them, transpilers is the path.
Patrick and Jonathan, please stand up so we can get you some mics.
Actually, it goes back even further than that. With when JavaScript first arrived on the scene, one of the advantages to being an old fart is you can remember stuff like this. Because the reason why JavaScript allows an opening HTML comment to comment stuff out is, of course, when JavaScript first landed and you put stuff inside a script element, the default behavior for a browser that doesn't understand an element is to display whatever's in between it. And so we had that. And for many years, it was the best practice that you would always begin your JavaScript with the opening HTML comment and the C data, right? Anybody remember this stuff?
Still do it.
Right, still do it. Right, hardcore. And then, but at some point, we transition and we move on. Yeah, it's pretty similar.
But that breaks, the point about IE8, and that I've seen that break recently in something. I cannot remember what it was, but that missing caused a break in something we deployed to. Our future is transpilers, and that doesn't seem like a sane approach for everyone who wants to make a website.
Well, the other situation we've been in the past like this, where there's a modern way to doing it and there's the old-fashioned way to doing it, we need to move to the modern way, was with browser support for CSS, standardized CSS. And we hit upon the doc type hack, effectively, right? The doc type switching to do that. And I suspect that we'll see something similar happen with ES6. We'll see something like somebody will discover something within the spec. Go, ooh, if you put this in your code, it's basically like a true false for does this browser support ES6.
Go.
So this tool is adding a barrier to entry for new developers as well. So I work with a lot of new developers that, and I was teaching them this, how to use Babel, how to compile JSX, and it means like onboarding of new tooling and stuff, which is really complicated for them. Also, having to compile code is harming our ability to iterate. So we're having to wait for our code to compile, which takes 2-3 seconds. Switch to our browser, refresh, and while we can have it watching, it's harming our workflow.
I think that the baseline for a new developer is still HTML, CSS, and a script tag to some file that is just whatever JavaScript is supported in the browsers you need, right? And that hasn't changed. I agree, it's very difficult to get started with JSX, React, Babel, whatever you're going to use.
Don't start there, yeah.
That's certainly not where you should be introducing someone to the web. The web at its core is still an HTML file, a CSS link ref to script, and then a JavaScript file that will just work.
So that's not the baseline for people who are actually starting with the web, joining a team. So they're joining a big company, and so that's not the baseline for them. They're having to be onboarded, and there's a lot more onboarding required.
Yeah, I agree.
Patrick, and then we got a next question.
So this is more of a question. James said something particular about how Babel and Transpilers were sort of a step backwards for the web in some ways. I was confused as to if you could elaborate on that, just because if ES3 continues to work to this day, no one's forcing anyone to use ES6, and if we want to try out new features and ship them, how is that breaking anything, I guess?
Yeah, so what I in particular meant is that of course, this is not a problem. This is not the first time we've dealt with syntax changes, and actually we're in a bit of a better place, because if you look back to ES1, 2, 3, there were syntax changes, but not syntax changes themselves, but the meaning of the syntax changed, and that was, you could detect it, but it meant your code would fail in unpredictable ways. It would fail at runtime rather than at parsing. So we're in a place where we'll get these syntax errors, and when people talk about trying to detect these ahead of time, they talk about all sorts of feature detection and transpiling dual sets of your files and being able to interact with the server in ways that is just not how the web works today. And trying to set that up for many, many, many developers outside of this room is very difficult. And I don't think that is the real solution forward, to depend on that.
I got to move on, so just hang on, and we can talk about it later. So I want to move away from really diving in on JavaScript specifically, appease Jake's, who made a comment. I want to talk about what baselines are. What are we enhancing from when we're talking about this? Do we accept that there's a common baseline? And where are we drawing that line? And how are we deciding?
Hell no, there's no common baseline.
Yeah, that.
Well, I think you try and go as low as you can, basically. Because
So
again,
how low can you go in a sort of limbo way?
a
or-
web server that transmits HTML documents, probably.
I don't agree. I don't agree. Not as low as you can, low as you should do.
As your,
And how-
As you should do
how
for
low
your
should
audience.
we
If you know your audience really well, like take the FT. They know their users really well.
and now you've baked in assumptions.
Yeah.
Right? And that's okay, as long as you've tested those assumptions.
Yeah, yeah.
Every
And if-
service and product is going to have assumptions. I love the quote that every stage of progressive enhancement should have users. So Facebook Mobile, the lowest common denominator is phones that don't support full HTML, which is probably as low as you can go. We support this thing that's like not quite WAP, but not quite HTML.
Yeah.
You can't style it, no CSS support. Yeah, it's WAC, not WAP. I like that. That's our lowest common denominator because our audience is people who want to communicate using a device. But I totally accept that not every service is going to have that same audience, and therefore is going to want to have a more reasonable lowest common denominator. So if I'm building a developer tool, which I also do, I usually say, like, if you're not on the latest version of Chrome or like a 6-month-old version of Chrome, I don't care. Right?
I would love
my
to know the
audience is different in
mind-reading
each case.
technology that allows a company to know exactly what their audience is going to be in the future as well as today. And it's fine. Like I'm saying, everyone has to make their own baseline, and that's totally cool. But let's call it what it is. It's assumptions. Saying, I'm going to assume that the audience are on this kind of device. I'm going to assume that the audiences have access to this feature or that feature. And if you're comfortable with that assumption, that's okay. But a lot of people seem to be uncomfortable with facing up to it, that what you're saying is, I'm accepting that I'm making an assumption here.
But
whereas
everyone-
the reality is unknown.
Everyone's making an assumption all the way, 100%. Even if you say you're going as low as you possibly can, you can go lower. Like you're talking Facebook. I'm sure that you've ever tried to cater for WAP users today.
I have, but
So yeah, you've already made the assumption they're not using a WAP phone.
But as we're making these assumptions or decisions, what criteria are we actually using? Are we deciding based on technology profiles, or are we actually thinking about like what humans are doing and needing?
Product design is so important in this sense. So what is it your product is trying to do? Who are the people who you're trying to support with that product? And what do they need to do? And what devices are they using to do it? If you can't have an answer to those 4 questions, then your assumptions are shooting in the dark. If you do have answers to those questions, you can make pretty reasonable assumptions that can save yourself a lot of time or enlighten you to areas that you might not be paying attention to yet.
I think it's a bit more subtle than that. It's not so much what's my audience want to do. It's like, what's the core functionality my audience must be able to do?
So I just saw a good point go by Jason Brown. I'd like him to talk a little bit about it regarding accessibility.
Hey, so the baseline should be accessibility, because we talk about our audience and stuff like that. Facebook's, problem with Japan. But when we actually look at what accessible devices can handle, it's very, very low. So you might be releasing a product that you don't have an audience yet. So what do you base that on? Whereas with accessibility, that there are certain things that people can't do. So you want to structure your HTML correctly with lists and the meta tags, stuff like that. And if you aim for being able to provide an accessible experience, then you provide a good baseline for progressively enhancing your application on top of that.
Yeah, but we deliver an accessible baseline, and then we completely fuck it up by delivering a shitload of JavaScript that just makes it inaccessible.
Yeah, exactly. But that's progressive enhancement, isn't it? So
yeah, but we detect that capability. We go full whack because we're like, this browser has every API that the WebGL bus stop, and we make it inaccessible. I'm just saying we lose the benefit of being accessible by.
But we should always aim to be accessible. That's the point.
Yeah, no, and I don't sell accessibility as an item like on the menu for my clients. It's going to be as accessible as I can make it. That's part of the work. It's not an itemized item. I think it should just be part of workflow. The same way as I think.
But I think for most people it is though, because I think honestly, if anyone put their hand up and said they always build apps or sites that are accessible, I think most of them would be trying to, lie but not feel bad about it, because most people don't think about it. They look at the most latest and greatest, tools for JS.
Where's Josh, please?
Jason, I agree with you, but I think we're using. I agree with you for different reasons. I'm going to use a different meaning of the word accessibility to what I think you mean. I think you're talking about assistive technology, Whereas I think everything should be accessible, as in the broadest term, accessible, as in regardless of what device, regardless of what browser, regardless of situation. Focusing purely on assistive technology could be dangerous because then you're kind of tied to the current situation. For example, there was a time when HTML was inaccessible. Screen readers exist longer than HTML, and when HTML came along with these angle brackets and then words and then more angle brackets, screen readers read that out as though it were a plain text file. That meant HTML itself was inaccessible. We moved on from there. So there's a difference between accessibility and accessibility.
But does that not force, so in that context, that screen readers read out HTML as actual characters? So the problem is that most people don't build for screen readers because they're not progressed enough as conventional browsers. So will that not force them to provide the same support that we're used to using in a normal browser?
But I don't think people should build for screen readers. People should build for the web, and then they get
Isn't a screen reader not a web, though?
They get screen readers by default. I do not think we should be building especially for accessibility, though I completely agree that it's a great baseline and a great testing.
Yeah, it should be a baseline.
Is Josh Emerson around? Still want to be in the queue, or I'm going to...
He's over there.
Yep.
Sorry, I lied earlier about not asking another question, but I couldn't resist. It's kind of maybe not about accessibility, but access. And when we're saying these are our users, we know them so well, we can only really know the users we have today. For instance, if you've excluded a load of people, like the people in Japan, I mean, you managed to discover that they were being left out, but it's really hard to know who else is left out. So if you try and let as many people access it in as many ways as possible, isn't that the goal here with the web? And we're not just talking about the browsers we know about today, we're talking about all browsers that can support any combination of features today, maybe very few of the features we have today, and also I'm dreaming about the future here, but AIs. Like, it doesn't need to be humans reading this stuff. So it's just about web content being able to get to as many things as possible.
All right. That wraps this question well. I want to move on to talking about how progressive enhancement, at least I think, isn't just about feature support in a binary yes, no, I support this from the browser. To what extent should factors of performance, the user's own abilities, and other nuances be considered as part of the process? And this question was inspired by one that Remy submitted. So I will let you start. I also want to note that we've lost Slack, so you can continue to abuse more aggressively, and we can't see it right now. So
basically, you can detect on a mobile device that it's the latest version of Chrome on a mobile phone, and you can send it all the best technology, and it turns out that it doesn't have very good CPU, or it's it's a low-powered device, and actually it's not very capable at all. I don't know what the answer is there at the moment. Basically, all I know is I can keep detecting and keep giving you more and more and more, and I don't have an answer. And that's there's almost is there a ceiling there or not? Does it matter?
I think this is a super important question. Most of where I spend attention on the lower end is on how much data is getting sent to these devices and how much strain I'm putting on the CPU and GPU. So I've run into cases where if the payload is more than something like 52 KB, it just whites out the screen. And so you have to do post-processing. You have to figure out okay, what are the user agents that suffer from this problem, and then let's post-process to pare down the file until we are sure that it is
so you
can be
just
held
said,
in
what
RAM.
are the user agents that have this
Yes,
problem?
because how else do you figure this out? This is a hard problem, right?
Yeah, but it's you have to be practical, and there's this balance between perfect and practical, and to be able to solve those kind of problems. The undetectables, you have to just go,
It turns out that user agents are pretty descriptive. They don't cover everything. They're not perfect, but they're pretty descriptive. We keep a database of, for every user agent string, what are the mapping of capabilities that we care about for that user agent.
Is that shared?
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the thing that we use, but it's not ours. We contribute to it, and it's open source, and I'm blanking on the name of it.
Sebastian, in the audience?
It's not really a question, it's more
good.
to answer the question on the screen, which is, at The Guardian, and Patrick put that link on Slack, I think I would say it's not just about working with that JavaScript, it's about performance and resilience as well. So in terms of performance, for instance, tweets, we don't enhance them, we don't use the widgets.js on mobile because it's too heavy and it makes the page go really slow. So we know on mobile, it's in terms of user experience, it's a better experience if you don't progressively enhance. So that's a choice you make as part of your UX. And in terms of performance, also we make the decision to only put in the page the article content. We don't put, say, the related links and other things. And that's because we know that doing that on the server, and that's kind of unrelated to the client, but bringing this information on the server, some extra components would make it less resilient. So this website would be less resilient, and therefore we do that on the client. And if it breaks, then that's fine. You still get the core content rather than not getting a page at all. So that's not really a question, but that's our take from it.
All right, Yoav, Florin?
Just to slightly go back to a point that was raised earlier, I think that progressive enhancement is all about, as well as feature support, there's also the question of computation support, about what do we do with weaker devices. And the whole cutting the mustard thing is using software in order to deduce hardware, which, for example, you have a lot of modern browsers. They're like Firefox OS, a modern browser being run on very low-end devices. And I'm sure Android and Chrome also has the same problem in some parts of the world. And we cannot continue, we can use cut the mustard as a stopgap. What we need to think about how we can expose the device capabilities, the computational capabilities of the device to both JavaScript and media queries and client hints and everywhere, because it impacts everything we do. It impacts image decoding. It impacts what JavaScript we want to send down, how much computation we want to get on the device. So we need to start thinking about that.
Jake wants to add connectivity to this, like in that range of complex things, connectivity.
So, yeah, I wanted to point out, Jake, since he's on this panel, he wants us to mention that.
The connectivity. But the thing is, I've completely lost my train of thought. Fuck it. There, that's it. Gone. User rate, basically there's no answer, right? If connectivity, you don't know what the connectivity is, but on the server as you're about to send the content to the phone or the device, desktop or otherwise. So you hope it's the very best type of connectivity, that you can get everything in there and like the perfect service worker, and it can do all its work before everything goes to shit. And then you're fine. But we don't have like hints that say, well, connectivity is ropey, so send a smaller version, or we don't have a workflow that is sending packets of 54 bytes of JavaScript or HTML in a go.
Kilobytes.
Kilobytes.
Well, this is why I think if we are going to make assumptions, we should assume the worst, basically, and build up. That's why I say that the baseline should be as low as possible.
But we assume the worst. But when the browser says, "Yeah, keep sending me the JavaScript. I've got connectivity. It's terrible, but keep sending to me anyway. I can do it." And it asks. Yeah, but you have to get into the browser to get offline first. You have to still get that first payload in.
And that's why I think that should be as low as possible and the least amount of technical requirements as possible. That lowest barrier, and then start enhancing. I'm a pretty big fan of aggressive enhancement, where you give capable browsers whatever they can handle, and if a lesser browser can't, instead of trying to polyfill it or think of a way of giving them something, you just say, well, you don't get that enhancement, as long as it's an enhancement, not the core functionality.
So I want to move on and continue our trend of disagreement. I don't want to get through this conversation without talking a little bit about semantics and about what it means when people say that they hate progressive enhancement or maybe use different terminology. So this was a question submitted by Jake, who wants us to remember that offline first is an important part of progressive enhancement.
By service workers.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. So framework fans seem to hate the term progressive enhancement, but love isomorphically server rendered, which is, according to the submitter, the same. Do people just hate the term, not the thing? Is this partially a semantic argument?
the term has become very unclear and overloaded. At least to me, I was reading a bunch of blog posts this week to try and have some form of opinion.
Which term? Progressive enhancement?
Progressive enhancement, sorry. I mean, I have different opinions about the term isomorphic. But yeah, I think it is a really unclear term. The difficulty is, for me, you can't define progressive enhancement because it is so contextual. We've already touched upon it. There is that baseline, and therefore, depending on the app I work on day to day versus what Jeremy works on, the base layer and then the enhancements are just probably worlds apart. In terms of why we all love isomorphically server-rendered, Reactified, Babeled, browserified applications, it's because we just like shiny stuff, I think, as developers, and we're drawn to all these new cool things, and sometimes that's not always the best thing.
I think there's something to that. Yeah, it's like progressive enhancement is a term that's been around for a while, therefore it's not cool.
Define a new term for it today, and everyone will be doing it for
years. This is the problem, though. This came up recently.
In the survey I sent out, even though it is a targeted audience, the vast majority of people did want to use progressive enhancement. It was not that I expected there to be like this new generation of developers that had no clue, didn't care about it, and it was the people that have been around for over 10 years that were saying make it work without JavaScript. But everyone here is interested in supporting the progressive enhancement.
I was actually surprised by this question because I see these two as totally different things. Where progressive enhancement is like an umbrella term that encompasses a lot of these techniques that we use. And isomorphic server rendered, JavaScript, great, that can be a technique. I don't even use it as a tool for progressive enhancement. I use it as a tool for optimization for performance. In order to get something up on the screen ASAP before my JavaScript loads, that's
I like the way Paul Irish stated it. Would you be willing to say that in public?
No.
Not just lurking on a channel?
I said, isomorphic is a really challenging term to use because it describes the implementation. It describes the developer's benefit, the fact that you can use language on both sides, but it has no implication as to the actual user benefit. And I think we should focus our vocabulary on the user benefits of techniques rather than how we implement them.
Completely. That's You're right. Isomorphic JavaScript is a technique, whereas progressive enhancement is more of a mindset. I know that sounds very hand-wavy and Zen-like, but it is. It's not a particular technology. It's a way of approaching all technologies.
So Kyle Simpson is frustrated with the question. I'm interested to hear a little bit more if you'd be willing, because he thinks it's a false piece of logic that these terms are even related.
Yeah, they are definitely not related because, again, it goes back to what I said earlier, that isomorphically server rendered is really just focusing on trying to share that same code in both places. I hate the term isomorphic, but this is much deeper than hating the term. What's wrong is that we're not actually focusing on what we should be solving. Isomorphic takes some code that we wrote on the server and runs it on the server and then sends up some markup, which is a good thing. I'm not hating on that at all. But that has nothing to do with deciding in the browser and responding and adapting to the conditions that both the user expresses, that the device expresses, that the connection expresses. That's what progressive enhancement ought to be, and it ought to not just be a binary thing at the beginning, but a continual thing as they experience the app for long periods of time.
And Jake, as the submitter of this question, are you willing to speak to in what kind of context or communities you've seen these terms equated to each other? And kind of what inspired you?
Yeah, the inspiration came from like a series of blog posts where particular framework authors who were very much against progressive enhancement would then do a blog post saying, hey, it's okay, I've actually solved this problem a different way by server rendering, and people like Airbnb, Ember Fastboot were sort of hailed as like, well, it's excellent, and they've solved this problem without doing progressive enhancement. And I do agree that isomorphic server rendering is not the start and end of progressive enhancement, but it's part of it, right? It's what will get the content there before JavaScript executes.
Cool. Comment from Vitali out there?
Hello. Yeah, my question is around the complexity that's related to progressive enhancement. If you got, well, I don't know if you agree with me or not. I think progressive enhancement is related with more complex development techniques. At least you need to do the baseline, then enhance it, whereas you can just dive in straight to JavaScript. Without progressive enhancement, if you got a tight time frames, time scales, how do you justify progressive enhancement with the client from business perspective?
I want to kind of try to tie this into this question just because we're down to a minute left, but I think you bring up a point that's important in terms of why people argue about progressive enhancement. Do you see progressive enhancement as a more advanced development technique that's always going to take more time?
No. In the same way that moving from tables for layout to CSS initially took more time, but then you get used to it, becomes normal. In the same way of going from fixed width to responsive design initially took more time and then becomes normal. It just becomes normal once you get used to doing it. It's a false dichotomy to say it's always going to cost more. It's interesting that the biggest two arguments I get against progressive enhancement are it's too easy and it's too hard. Right? Too easy because people say, but I'm making a really complicated app and therefore it can't possibly apply to me. And too hard because, oh, no, I've got to do it. I've got to do something on the server first before I send it to the client.
It's not a matter of you don't have time. You always have time. You have as much time as the business will pay for. Don't sell it as a separate item. They'll look at how to. It's a business you're trying to sell. You have all the time to build the thing that you have to build, and if that includes accessibility, progressive enhancement, doing it the right way, then you'll have that time.
So thanks for all your excitement. We're out of time. It's lunchtime, and there will also be a progressive enhancement-related breakout at 5 p.m. In the outer space room. So please come there if you have more things to talk about. Thanks to the panel.